On a snowy Christmas Eve, the streets are alive with festive music and cheerful holiday crowds. Families and couples enjoy the winter night, fully wrapped up in the festive spirit. Juwon, a towering man in a dark coat, quietly steps aside to let them pass. He bitterly realizes that while everyone else is celebrating together, he is completely alone on these cold streets. Heading toward the subway entrance, Juwon tries to ignore the joyful crowds. That is when he notices another lonely soul standing out in the cold. A homeless man dressed as Santa Claus, sitting on the frozen ground next to a sign asking for wishes. Normally, Juwon would walk right past. But today is the anniversary of the tragic accident that took his parents, leaving him entirely alone. Drawn to a fellow outcast, he decides to approach him. Deciding to do a good deed, Juwon pulls out some cash and a triangle kimbap for the struggling Santa. He sets the food and money down on the sign, figuring his charity work is done. But the second he drops the donation, the Santa aggressively grabs his wrist, deeply moved by the kindness and insisting on granting him a wish. Instantly regretting his decision, Juwon tries to shake the man off, thinking this is exactly why he never does nice things. He tries to pull his hand back, but realizes with shock that this old man has a superhuman grip. Juwon, who has never been overpowered in his life, cannot move an inch. The Santa begs him to cooperate, claiming he is trapped on Earth and cannot return home until he grants a genuine wish. Realizing he won't be let go, Juwon asks if he will be freed if he just makes a wish, and the old man agrees. Hoping to get this over with, Juwon wishes to win the lottery, but the Santa calls him out for being fake and demands his true heart's desire. The demand forces Juwon to look deep inside himself, confronting his heavy loneliness and his quiet longing for a real family. Resigning himself to the absurdity, he finally voices his deepest wish, telling the Santa he wants a loving wife and a daughter as cute as a mongoose. The Santa claims he can sense the deep, sincere longing of a lonely soul, feeling lucky to meet someone who understands isolation. He grins and promises to find Juwon a pure-hearted wife and an adoring daughter. Horrified by this creepy behavior, Juwon yanks himself away, but the strange Santa keeps wishing him a joyful life. Finally breaking the grip, Juwon runs down the street screaming that the man is insane, while the Santa yells after him that he will use his full magical power to grant the wish. As Juwon scrambles down into the subway, the Santa screams that all of Santa Village is rooting for him. Safe inside the train, Juwon sits down to catch his breath, trying to convince himself he just ran into a standard city lunatic. But as he rides home, he feels a bit melancholy, admitting to himself that deep down, he just wants to be happy too. He closes his eyes to rest, wishing to be normal, but a strange smell and a biting chill snap him back to consciousness. He groggily wakes up to a massive shock. He is no longer on the subway, but locked inside a cage carriage rolling through a medieval fantasy village. Stripped to his underwear and bound in iron chains, he desperately wonders where he is. Looking around the cramped carriage at several other dirty, chained-up prisoners, he realizes he has somehow been sent back to a medieval setting. Heavy footsteps approach, and he hears voices speaking in an alien tongue. Looking between the iron bars, he spots fully armored soldiers patrolling the area, and he cannot understand a single word they say. Taking in the medieval surroundings, the foreign language, and the lack of anything familiar, he quickly rules out the possibility of this being a movie set. Struggling to figure out if this is a realistic dream or reality, he has to accept the truth. He has been transported to another world. Shivering violently in the biting wind, he notices a lifeless prisoner slumped in the corner. Knowing he must prioritize his own survival, he slides over, whispers an apology, and takes the man's tattered green tunic to wear. As he lies on the cold wooden floor, he bitterly remembers the Santa's promise, wondering if this miserable captivity is the happiness he was promised, and if his idea of a happy life was wrong all along. Days pass as the carriage travels deeper into the wilderness, leaving him praying to wake up from this nightmare. During the endless ride, he gathers a few crucial facts, starting with the devastating realization that everyone in the cage is classified as a slave. He also figures out the purpose of their long journey. The armored soldiers are dragging them from town to sell them to the highest bidder. Whenever they roll into a new settlement, the guards unlock the cage, lining the captives up for local buyers to inspect. Even though accepting his status as property crushes his pride, Juwon feels a glimmer of hope during these auctions. He realizes that getting bought is his only ticket out of this suffocating wooden cage. Given his solid physical conditioning and athletic build, he is confident he will be sold off immediately. But that optimism quickly turns to despair after they visit several more villages and no one shows interest in buying him. Juwon lies in the carriage, completely hollowed out by the constant rejection, questioning if there is any point in surviving. In his darkest moment, he remembers his late mother's childhood advice to always work hard and persevere. He cries out to his parents in his mind, wondering if he can survive this nightmare while the creepy Santa's promises echo in his head. Realizing happiness was just a cruel joke, Juwon decides he has had enough and reaches for a stray metal fork on the carriage floor. Gripping the makeshift weapon, he decides his only escape from this relentless suffering is to end his own life. He presses the sharp tines against his throat, but suddenly freezes. He realizes he does not want his story to end in a pathetic slave cage. He still desperately wants a chance at real happiness. Just as he lowers the fork, a gentle hand reaches through the iron bars, holding a fresh loaf of warm bread. He looks up and sees a stunning, kind-hearted woman smiling warmly at him. She speaks softly, and peeking from behind her dress is an incredibly cute little girl. Stunned, Juwon drops his fork to the floor. A modest wooden house sits quietly in the village. Inside, the woman sits with the little girl, sharing a simple meal together. The blonde child drinks soup directly from her bowl, while the woman pushes her own food toward the girl and gently encourages her to eat more. The little girl looks back and forth between the two bowls for a few seconds before shaking her head. Lizzie claims she is already full and wants her to have the rest, but the little girl acts like a mature adult and refuses to take it. The girl replies that if she is hungry, then Lizzie must be hungry too. After saying that, she gently pushes the food back toward the woman. Lizzie smiles warmly and agrees to continue sharing the meal. But their peaceful moment is suddenly shattered when a loud, aggressive knocking echoes through the house. Lizzie immediately pulls the girl into her arms and holds her tightly, whispering to her not to open the door. The village chief stands outside the door. He loudly announces that the village has chosen one of the prisoners to be her new husband, ordering her to prepare to return to the mountain with him. The shocking news hits Lizzie like a bolt of lightning. Fear washes over her face because she cannot bear the thought of reliving the nightmare that waits for her in that place. Even though escape is impossible, she wraps her arms tightly around the little girl, refusing to let go. Although she has only known the child for a short time, the mere thought of leaving her all alone is completely unbearable. Tears pool in Lizzie's eyes as a deep sense of despair consumes her heart. Sensing her terror, the little girl also begins to cry. Her soft cries quickly turn into loud, desperate sobs, filling the dark house with sadness as a heavy, suffocating atmosphere swallows them. As night falls, Lizzie sits quietly in the dark cabin while the little girl sleeps peacefully nearby. The thought of returning to that living nightmare makes her body tremble with fear. Having survived it once, the idea of facing the same abuse and suffering again feels completely unbearable. Her eyes slowly drift toward the sleeping child, watching her breathe. The little girl's sad situation reminds Lizzie of her own painful past. The child is just the daughter of a dead man and has not even been given a proper name, and seeing her always brings back memories Lizzie has tried hard to bury. Many years ago, her own father traded her away for a single rabbit pelt, treating her life as if it meant absolutely nothing. The day she arrived at her new home marked the beginning of her endless misery. She had not even finished unpacking her few belongings when the man who was supposed to be her husband began treating her with terrible cruelty. In that painful moment, Lizzie realized her new life would not be a safe haven, but simply another prison. While lying helpless on the floor after a terrible moment of abuse, a tiny figure slowly walked over to her. The little girl crouched down beside her, gently touching her skin as if trying to soothe her physical and emotional pain. Amidst that endless nightmare, this little child became the only source of warmth Lizzie had in the world. Not long after, the cruel hunter left for the mountains as he always did, but this time he never returned. The villagers rumored that wild wolves had taken him somewhere deep inside the hunting grounds. His sudden disappearance brought immense relief, but that sense of peace was quickly replaced by a new fear. Lizzie knows all too well what happens to an unprotected widow in a harsh place like this village. A woman without a husband is treated like defenseless prey standing outside the safety fence. Anyone can target or mistreat her whenever they please. Lizzie and the little girl hold hands as they walk from their cabin toward the busy village. Suddenly, the child stops in her tracks and points excitedly towards something in the distance. Her eyes sparkle with curiosity after spotting a prisoner wagon slowly arriving from afar. Lizzie follows her gaze and sees a heavy wooden cage rolling slowly along the dusty road. Realizing the danger of what is happening, she immediately begins to panic. She vividly remembers shielding the little girl from her former husband's violent anger, and she wonders with dread if history is about to repeat itself. The sight frightens her deeply, yet she finds herself unable to just turn and walk away. Driven by pity, she quietly approaches and offers the prisoner a piece of bread through the wooden bars. Their quiet moment is interrupted when the village chief arrives and demands to know why she is still hanging around. He warns her that the soldiers are on their way and tells her to quickly head back to her cabin. Lizzie forces a gentle smile and leads the child away. But the little girl keeps looking back at the wooden cage with deep concern. Juwon stares blankly at the piece of bread, but the guards suddenly open the cage door and shout at him to get out. Without a shred of kindness, they drag him out and throw him face first onto the hard dirt road. The piece of bread rolls away into the dust as Juwon struggles to comprehend his confusing situation. Moments later, 3 prisoners are forced to kneel on the ground in front of the gathered crowd. The village chief gives a cold order, and without any warning, the guards execute the other 2 men with sharp weapons. After the execution, one of the guards calmly cleans his stained blade using a strange, glowing magic scroll. Juan stares in absolute disbelief, wondering what kind of strange magic exists in this unfamiliar world. One of the soldiers suddenly walks over to the village chief and whispers a quiet report, claiming that he senses mana coming from Juan. The chief immediately glares down at Juan, who is deeply confused and unable to understand a single word, only looking up with a completely lost expression. Back inside the safety of Lizzie's cabin, an older village woman has come to pay her a visit. She brings some basic household supplies and tells Lizzie to keep them safe for later use. The older woman explains that the new prisoner does not understand their language and gently reminds Lizzie that she will eventually have to repay the village for their help. She admits that nobody actually liked Lizzie's late husband, explaining that the villagers only tolerated his presence because of his hunting skills. However, she believes this new man might be different. Although the soldiers claim he is just a commoner, his soft hands and feet look more like a nobleman's. The older woman smiles and suggests that if he can hunt well, Lizzie might finally live a comfortable life. But Lizzie immediately shakes her head in disagreement. Living comfortably is no longer what she cares about. Holding the older woman's hands with tears pooling in her eyes, she quietly begs for just one thing. She hopes this new husband will not be violent or hurt anyone. All she wants is a peaceful life for herself and the little girl. Their conversation is cut short when sudden, heavy knocks rattle the front door. Lizzie instantly scoops the sleeping child into her arms and peeks outside through a small gap in the wooden wall. Her entire body stiffens when she sees Juan standing there right next to the village chief. The chief pushes the door open, enters first, and loudly announces that he has brought her new husband. Lizzie can barely process the terrifying reality of his words. Juan steps inside the cabin, asking aloud where they are taking him, completely confused by his surroundings. Since Lizzie cannot understand a single word he says, her fear grows, and she wonders why they brought such a sickly, pale man to her home. But then she notices another detail. He is incredibly, unbelievably tall. Lizzie has never seen a person of such massive size before in her life. Juan stares back at her in confusion, quickly recognizing her as the kind woman who gave him bread earlier that day. Seeing her shake and tremble like a frightened rabbit only leaves him feeling even more puzzled. The village chief suddenly grabs Juan's arm and pulls him forward. Standing directly between them, he formally introduces Juan as Lizzie's new husband. He then forces their hands together, cheerfully telling them not to be nervous since they will soon become a real family. Juan's mind finally starts putting all the pieces together. Santa Claus had promised him a pure, gentle wife and an adorable little daughter. And now, a terrified woman stands right in front of him, while a tiny little girl hides behind her like a scared hamster. For a moment, he completely forgets about his surroundings. Then, a wild thought pops into his head. What if Santa Claus is actually real? Even if his wish is coming true, Juan still can't understand why he had to be thrown into another world and forced to go through so much suffering first. A sudden wave of anger rises deep inside him. In his mind, he pictures himself as a furious bear, ready for revenge, while Lizzie and the little girl look like helpless little animals trying their best not to get eaten. Outside the cabin, Juan stands with the villagers, doing his absolute best to understand what they are trying to say. The village chief and two other men keep talking amongst themselves, occasionally glancing over at him as if they are deciding his fate. Eventually, one of the villagers steps forward and holds out his hand. Juan assumes it is just a friendly greeting and shakes it without hesitation. But the real problem starts when he squeezes back with what he thinks is normal strength. The man's face instantly twists in absolute pain, leaving Juan staring back in complete confusion. For a second, he actually wonders if crushing someone's hand is just a normal custom in this place. When he finally lets go, the villager stumbles backward, complaining loudly in pain, which makes the village chief burst out laughing. The chief then hands Juan a bow and a quiver of arrows. Holding the weapon in his hands leaves him completely speechless. He has no idea why they suddenly handed him a weapon, but it is clear that they don't want him to fight. The chief then begins making funny, over-the-top hand gestures, putting two fingers over his head like rabbit ears and pointing toward the forest. It is only then that Juan finally gets it. They want him to go hunting. The village chief looks very pleased with himself, happy that the giant newcomer understood his terrible acting. He smiles proudly and points further into the woods. Just then, a white rabbit appears nearby, calmly nibbling on some grass. The chief excitedly points at it and urges him to take a shot, but Juan has never even held a bow in his life. He remembers watching Olympic archery on TV and knows how hard it is to hit a target, even for professionals. Even so, he pulls the bowstring back with all his strength and focuses his eyes on the rabbit. He fires and the rabbit drops instantly. To be honest, he has absolutely no idea how he managed to make such a perfect shot. While he is trying to process what just happened, he notices some movement at the edge of the trees. Lizzie has come back, and walking right beside her is Dorothy, the little girl. The moment Juan sees the two of them walking toward him, a cold sweat starts to form on his forehead. Reality finally hits him like a truck. This incredibly beautiful woman is actually his wife now. A strange warm feeling rises up inside his chest as his face begins to turn red. The villagers watch him closely, completely confused as to why this giant of a man suddenly looks so shy and awkward. Not long after that, the three of them sit down together to have their very first meal as a family. Lizzie quietly ladles hot stew into bowls for both Juwon and Dorothy. It is just a simple dish, but the rich aroma alone feels incredibly warm and comforting. Both Lizzie and Dorothy watch him anxiously as he lifts his spoon and takes a bite. Juwon doesn't say a word, he just keeps eating. Then, a small smile appears on his face. Having a family of his own has always been nothing more than a distant dream. From his teenage years all the way into adulthood, he has always lived completely alone, with no one ever waiting for him to come home. But now, by some miracle, he has been given people of his own to cherish and protect. Maybe things didn't happen in a normal way, but none of that matters to him anymore. Looking up at the sky, Juwon silently vows that he still wants to get revenge on Santa Claus for what he went through. But at the exact same time, he is truly deeply grateful to him. The next morning, everything happens in a blur as they pack up their belongings and begin the journey toward their new home. Juwon walks ahead carrying a massive, heavy sack on his shoulder, but when he looks back, he notices Lizzie and Dorothy struggling to keep up with him. Their footsteps have slowed down significantly, and their faces are covered in sheer exhaustion. Seeing this frustrates him deeply, especially since he cannot even ask them if they are doing okay. In that moment, his mother's wise words suddenly echo in his mind. She always told him that whenever he feels the desire to protect someone, he must act immediately without any hesitation. Remembering her advice instantly strengthens his determination. Suddenly, little Dorothy stops walking entirely. Her tiny hands tightly grip Lizzie's skirt as big tears begin to well up in her eyes. Juwon quickly crouches down to her level, trying his best to comfort and reassure her. Unfortunately, his sudden and fast movement only ends up scaring both of them even more. Lizzie panics and starts speaking rapidly in her own language, while poor Dorothy begins crying even harder than before. Juwon blinks in surprise, realizing his naturally serious face is only making a bad situation worse. Without saying another word, Juwon simply steps forward and lifts both Lizzie and Dorothy up into his arms at once. They stare at him in utter shock as he effortlessly carries them both and keeps walking. Their bodies instinctively hold onto him tightly, with Lizzie struggling to process what is even happening right now. Juwon gently adjusts his grip on them to make sure they are as comfortable as possible for the rest of the trip. Carrying all their luggage along with both of them doesn't feel heavy to him at all. As they travel, Juwon makes a firm decision. He is going to learn their language no matter what. He will become a skilled hunter, and he will provide for his new family properly. Tears quietly well up in Lizzie's eyes as she looks at him. None of his actions match the scary, violent image she had feared he would be. Eventually, they arrive at a small, cozy cabin hidden deep inside the dense forest. The village chief waves goodbye and heads back, leaving the newly formed family alone in their new home. Juwon takes a close look at the house in front of him. A draft of freezing air slips right through the wooden walls, making him shiver. He has always absolutely hated the winter and the cold. Putting his feelings aside, he walks up to the front door and slowly pushes it open. Inside, he finds Lizzie standing there waiting, her eyes filled with tears. Feeling confused, Juwon asks her why she is crying, but she doesn't give him an answer. Instead, Lizzie suddenly turns around and runs deeper into the back of the house. Juwon looks around the room and finally understands what's going on. All of the shelves are completely bare. The entire place has been turned upside down, and everything of value is gone. Walking back outside, Lizzie tries to explain using hand gestures that while she was away at the village, someone broke in and stole every single thing they owned. Winter is right around the corner, and now they are left with absolutely nothing. Later that evening, he finds her sitting all by herself on the grass outside. Juwon walks over and quietly sits down right next to her. For a long moment, neither of them says or does a thing. Then, he gently reaches out and places his hand on her head. Lizzie looks up at him, completely surprised. His touch is so gentle and warm, completely free of the coldness or aggression she had been so afraid of. Juwon tries his best to comfort her, even though they can't actually understand each other's words. Lizzie looks at him, unable to stop worrying about their future, especially since they can barely communicate. He knows almost nothing about how to survive or hunt in the wild, so making it through the winter won't be easy. But then, Juwon looks at her and offers a warm, reassuring smile. With complete confidence in his eyes, he promises her that he will protect them no matter what. The exact words don't make sense to her, but somehow, she understands the meaning perfectly. This makes her heart feel a lot lighter. Ever since Juwon lost his parents, he has had to survive everything completely on his own. If he was strong enough to get through all of that by himself, then there is no reason he cannot handle whatever comes next. Especially now that he actually has a family by his side, he is determined to find a way to make things work. Feeling completely overwhelmed by all these emotions, Lizzie quietly bursts into tears, unable to hold them back anymore. Seeing this, Juwon gently pulls her into a warm hug to comfort her. Just then, the little girl runs over to them, shouting something in a total panic. She wraps her arms tightly around Lizzie and begs Juwon not to hurt Rai. With a crying woman in his arms and a terrified little girl clinging to them, Juhwan takes in the situation. So many questions run through his head, and he doesn't have the answers to any of them. Even so, he makes a silent promise to himself. He will do whatever it takes to become a good husband and a wonderful father to them. He vows that one day, neither of them will ever regret choosing to be with him. As some time passes, the broken cabin slowly starts to change as Juhwan works hard to repair the damaged parts of the house. Sitting on the floor during a quiet moment, Juhwan starts thinking about his relationship with Lizzie and Dorothy. In a lot of ways, it feels like they have gone right back to the very beginning. The closeness they shared earlier seems to have faded, and it feels like he is a complete stranger to them once again. But strangely enough, a part of him actually feels relieved because this gives them a fresh chance to start their relationship the right way. Then, a sudden idea comes to his mind. If they are going to live under the same roof, they should at least know what to call each other. Juhwan gets their attention, points a finger at his chest, and clearly pronounces his own name. Lizzie and Dorothy watch him with curious eyes, trying to figure out what he is doing. He then reaches his hand out toward Lizzie and gently asks for her name. Lizzie hesitates for a second, just staring at his open hand. Eventually, she quietly whispers her name. At first, the pronunciation sounds a bit strange to him, but after she says it once more, Juhwan finally gets it. A warm smile spreads across his face, and he tells her that she has a truly beautiful name. After that, he turns his attention to the little girl, and the mood in the room instantly shifts. Dorothy looks up at Lizzie for help, but Lizzie just lowers her eyes sadly. Seeing this, the truth finally clicks in Juhwan's mind. This little child doesn't even have a name yet. A quiet silence fills the room while he tries to think of the right words to say. After a moment, a special story from his old world comes back to his memory. With a warm and gentle expression, he decides to give her a name himself, calling her Dorothy. Using hand gestures and simple words, Juhwan explains that the name belongs to a girl who goes on a grand adventure, makes precious friends, and eventually finds true happiness. He deeply wants this sweet little girl standing in front of him to grow up to be just like that. Dorothy repeats the name softly to herself. She says it once more, and a bright, beautiful smile slowly spreads across her face. Later on, Juhwan goes back outside to chop some wood, while Lizzie secretly watches him from a distance. To her, he is still an incredibly strange and mysterious man. He is much taller and stronger than the man who lived here before, but absolutely everything else about him is completely different. He treats her with real kindness, never once raising his hand or shouting at her. The more she watches him, the more she realizes he doesn't seem like anyone else from this world. Quietly whispering his name to herself, Lizzie thinks back to all the painful days she had to endure in the past. Absolutely no one has ever treated her with this much warmth and care. She just cannot understand why a man like him would be so kind to her. Suddenly, Juhwan looks up and notices her watching him. He flashes a warm smile, waves his hand, and calls her over to him. Lizzie freezes on the spot. His pitch-black hair and dark eyes instantly catch her attention all over again. Old rumors she heard in the past start rushing back into her mind, stories about a great kingdom fighting a war that supposedly summoned a powerful hero. They said that legendary figure has black eyes and black hair, just like the man standing in front of her. As Juhwan slowly walks over to her with a curious look, Lizzie quickly shakes the thought out of her head. She tells herself that a legendary hero would never show up in a tiny, forgotten village like this. It simply has to be nothing more than silly rumors and gossip. The two of them stand face to face, and a quiet silence settles between them. Lizzie starts to get incredibly nervous as her heart beats faster and faster. Looking at him from this close only confirms what she saw, those deep black eyes and that dark hair. But instead of feeling terrified, a strange sense of relief washes over her chest. She can't explain why she feels so safe and comfortable around a man she barely even knows. Juhwan looks at her, feeling a bit confused himself. He then reaches out and gently places a hand on her head, which makes Lizzie's entire body freeze. Every single memory she has of men touching her like this is filled with cruelty and pain. But this hand feels completely different. It is warm, incredibly careful, and very soft. For the very first time in her life, she actually finds herself wishing he wouldn't stop. Juhwan notices how she reacts to his touch and blushes a little bit. That is when he suddenly acts on pure impulse. He leans in slightly and places a soft, gentle kiss right on her forehead. Lizzie freezes completely, unable to move a muscle. Juhwan freezes up right along with her. A second later, a wave of pure embarrassment rushes over his face, turning it completely red. Totally unable to handle how awkward things just got, he quickly grabs a nearby wooden bucket, desperately looking for any excuse to run away. Lizzie is left standing there all alone, her cheeks burning hot and her heart pounding wildly in her chest. Meanwhile, Juhwan is screaming at himself in his head, realizing they just met and can't even speak the same language yet. They can barely understand each other at all, so he has no idea what got into him to make him act like that. Trying his best to calm his racing heart, he walks much farther into the woods than he meant to, planning to fetch some water before heading back. But suddenly he freezes mid-step. He feels a strange, dangerous presence nearby. Slowly stepping out of the dark shadows is a massive, giant wolf with glowing red eyes. A cold sweat runs down Juhuan's back, but he forces himself to stay calm, refusing to let any fear show on his face. This is no longer some fantasy story. This is a real, dangerous beast standing right in front of him. Without wasting a single second, he ducks down and grabs a thick piece of wood lying on the ground. The wild beast lunges at him first, moving with terrifying speed. Its powerful jaws clamp down on the wooden branch, shattering his makeshift weapon instantly. Juhuan doesn't back down and answers the attack with a heavy punch. His fist lands with a solid thud directly on the wolf's head. In retaliation, the creature bites down hard on his arm, sending a sharp wave of pain shooting through his entire body. But he refuses to go down. Gritting his teeth, he swings and throws another punch. The heavy blow connects, making the beast howl out in pain. Suddenly, bright orange flames burst right out of Juhuan's body, and his eyes widen in pure shock. He has absolutely no idea what is going on or how he is doing this. His shock quickly turns into pure survival instinct, and Juhuan climbs on top of the beast, raining down a barrage of flaming punches one after another. The giant wolf finally collapses to the ground, and a heavy silence falls over the quiet forest once again. Juhuan falls back onto the grass, panting heavily as he tries to process what just happened. Just moments ago, his arm was engulfed in hot flames, but looking at it now, there isn't a single burn mark on his skin. There is only one logical explanation for this. He somehow just used magic. He immediately remembers the glowing magic scrolls the guards were carrying. He realizes that being transported to this new world might have given him special powers after all. Feeling excited, Juhuan strikes a dramatic pose and raises his hand toward the sky. He shouts out, trying to summon a fireball, but absolutely nothing happens, and the air remains completely still. He tries shouting firestorm, but still nothing. He then tries firewall, but there is absolutely no reaction. He yells out one spell name after another, but they all fail, leaving him standing there looking completely embarrassed and defeated. Even though he feels silly, Juhuan knows one thing for sure. What happened earlier was definitely not an illusion. He notices that his wounds have already started to heal, confirming his theory. If he really has magic, he hopes he can use it to get delicious food, protect his new family, or even heal people in a village that has no doctors. But this line of thought brings back a sad memory from his past. After his parents passed away, his grandfather was the only person left supporting him, but he also disappeared in a tragic accident. To make things worse, his selfish uncle blamed him for everything that happened after that. Juhuan remembers lying helpless on the floor while his angry relatives yelled at him, calling him a curse and a source of misfortune. Shaking his head, Juhuan pushes those painful memories out of his mind and focuses on the giant wolf lying dead in front of him. He knows that leaving the carcass out here will only attract other wild beasts, and he still needs to drain its blood anyway. Not wanting to waste any more time, he lifts the massive body onto his shoulders and begins the long walk back home under the bright moonlight. As he walks through the dark woods, memories of his grandfather come back to him. The old man used to butcher animals and would teach Juhuan how to do it, never realizing how useful those lessons would become in another world. Carrying the heavy wolf on his back, Juhuan smiles softly, thinking his grandfather would probably be very proud of him if he could see him right now. At the same time, he wonders how he is supposed to practice this strange new magic when he's busy carrying giant monsters around all day. Back at the cozy cabin, things are peaceful. Lizzie and Dorothy are working together inside, taking care of some simple chores. Dorothy runs over excitedly with a wooden bowl and hands it over to her mother. Lizzie smiles and thanks her, gently patting her head, which makes the little girl beam with absolute happiness. Feeling full of energy, Dorothy happily runs around the living room. But suddenly she stops in her tracks. Her eyes widen in complete shock. The massive head of a giant wolf appears right outside the entrance, and the terrified little girl lets out a loud scream. Hearing her daughter scream, Lizzie rushes over to her immediately. Without a second thought, she grabs a sharp knife from the kitchen table and runs straight toward the door. She doesn't feel any fear for her own safety. Her only instinct is to protect her beloved daughter. But when she reaches the door, she finally notices Juhuan standing there, carrying the dead beast on his shoulder. Her expression instantly changes from terror to relief, and she calls out his name as she rushes forward to meet him. Completely exhausted from carrying the heavy wolf, Juhuan drops the carcass onto the ground with a heavy thud. Lizzie stops right in front of him, still holding the knife, completely frozen in shock at the size of the beast. Without thinking, she steps forward and throws her arms around him in a tight hug. Juhuan just blinks in surprise, not expecting this at all. Dorothy quickly runs over and joins them, wrapping both of her small arms around his leg while crying from a mix of fear and relief. Smiling awkwardly, Juhuan uses hand gestures to explain that he only got a small bite on his arm and that he is completely fine now. After calming down, the three of them sit together under the bright moonlight next to the fallen wolf. Lizzie speaks softly to him in her native language, and even though Juhuan doesn't understand a single word, he can feel that she is deeply thanking him. Dorothy says something too with a worried look on her face, making him realize just how much he scared the poor girl. A wave of guilt washes over him. He had promised himself that he would never make them cry again, yet he has already broken that promise on his very first day. Later, as a crow lands on the cabin roof, Ju-hwan gets to work preparing the wolf inside. Using a sharp knife, he carefully works on skinning the beast, separating the thick fur from the flesh. But the job is much harder than he remembers. His grandfather always made it look so easy, but doing it himself is a different story. Sweat pours down his face as he silently admits defeat, promising himself that he will find a much easier way to do this next time. Just as he is wrapping up the difficult work, he suddenly hears someone call his name. Turning around, he sees Lizzie standing at the doorway, holding a wooden bucket. She walks over slowly and gestures with her hands, showing him that he should put the freshly cut meat inside the bucket. Ju-hwan smiles as he understands her message. She wants to help him with the chores. Trying his absolute best to remember the foreign words, he carefully says "thank you" in her native language. Lizzie looks surprised for a moment, and then a warm smile spreads across her face. It seems he managed to pronounce the word correctly after all. A slightly awkward but sweet silence fills the room as they stand there facing each other. After a brief pause, Lizzie decides to try saying something in his language too. She hesitantly repeats a word in his language, looking at him with a cute, questioning expression to see if she got it right. Ju-hwan smiles warmly and thanks her for trying, which instantly makes Lizzie blush with embarrassment. As they carry the bucket together, her mind starts to wander again. No one has ever thanked her just for bringing water before. No one has ever treated her everyday chores as something special. She remembers what happened earlier, his hand resting on her head and that soft kiss on her forehead. Her face turns bright red all over again. Even now, her heart refuses to calm down. She wonders if he has ever done things like this with other women. The thought strangely hurts her chest, bringing up feelings she doesn't quite understand. Once they are back in the cabin, Ju-hwan sets the meat on the table and nearly jumps when Lizzie suddenly appears right next to him. She steps closer to help, thinking this is supposed to be her job, but Ju-hwan is already doing it as if it's his duty. In the process, their hands accidentally touch the same piece of meat. A sudden silence fills the room, making Lizzie incredibly nervous. When Ju-hwan leans a bit closer, her heart nearly stops beating. But instead of doing anything bold, he simply gives her another gentle kiss on her forehead. Lizzie freezes on the spot. This time, she immediately steps back with a burning red face, completely panicking inside. She even grabs her own hair out of pure embarrassment, worried that he might have misunderstood her earlier reaction. Determined not to make the same mistake again, Lizzie makes a promise to herself to keep her eyes wide open next time. Meanwhile, Ju-hwan just carries the bucket away, having absolutely no idea why Lizzie looks like she is about to explode. Little do they know, Dorothy has been secretly watching the whole time, seeing the entire thing unfold. Unable to handle the overwhelming embarrassment, Lizzie panics completely and runs off like a storm, leaving Ju-hwan standing there in total confusion. The next morning, the family walks together through the bright, sunny forest. After walking for a while, Ju-hwan notices a pair of tiny hands repeatedly reaching out toward the bucket he's carrying. At first, he is confused, but then he finally realizes what is happening. Dorothy wants to help him. A warm, gentle smile spreads across his face. He lowers the bucket and thanks her for helping him carry something so important for their family. Dorothy's eyes light up with joy as she proudly grabs the edge of the bucket. For the first time in her life, she feels truly helpful. Back inside the cozy cabin, Lizzie is carefully touching the giant wolf pelts spread across the wooden floor. Ju-hwan sits right behind her, quietly watching and wondering why she decided to dry the large pelts inside the house. After thinking about it for a moment, it finally clicks. This isn't just simple fur. A thick pelt like this is incredibly valuable, warm, and probably their most important item for surviving the harsh winter. Dorothy soon walks over and crouches down right next to her mother. With curious eyes, she reaches her little hand out and touches the dark fur. She is instantly amazed by how soft it feels. Watching the mother and daughter smile together warms Ju-hwan's heart. For the first time in a long while, he looks at them and truly feels that his family is safe and secure. Later that day, the small cabin hidden deep in the mountains becomes busy once again. Lizzie is carefully rubbing salt into the pieces of meat to preserve them for the future. Ju-hwan watches her closely, paying attention to every detail because he wants to learn how people store food in this world. Lizzie looks genuinely happy as she manages to save the fat and other useful parts from their hunt. Watching her, Ju-hwan silently admits to himself that there is still so much he needs to learn about this new life. After sitting and resting for a while, Ju-hwan finally stands back up. The sudden movement startles Lizzie, who quickly waves her hands and tries to tell him to sit back down and rest some more. Ju-hwan just smiles and gestures to let her know he feels perfectly fine. He gently taps her shoulder and promises he won't push himself too hard, leaving Lizzie standing there speechless as he heads out. Once outside, Ju-hwan finds a large tree trunk and decides to practice swinging his axe. He looks at his reflection in the sharp blade, trusting in his own strength even though he doesn't have much experience with physical labor. He raises the axe high above his head and swings it down with all his might. The result completely shocks him. When Ju-hwan walks back to the cabin, he is carrying enough chopped firewood to completely fill a massive basket. Both Lizzie and Dorothy are completely stunned by how fast he worked and the massive amount of wood he brought back. Stepping inside, Juwon finally sits down to catch his breath while Lizzie quickly runs over to him looking very worried. Suddenly, Dorothy shows up holding a clean cloth to help wipe his sweat. But right after, she runs off again, bursting with energy. A moment later, she comes back with wet hands from dipping them in the water bucket, and she jumps straight onto his chest, leaving wet little handprints all over his clothes. Juwon looks surprised for a second, but then he bursts out laughing. Lizzie starts laughing too, and the tense atmosphere in the room instantly brightens up. Dorothy looks up at him with wide, bright eyes, waiting to see how he will react. Juwon gently pats her head and thanks her for doing such a good job taking care of him. This makes the little girl even more excited, and she starts running around the room again while the two adults watch her with helpless smiles. To Juwon, the whole scene feels almost unreal. It honestly feels like a beautiful dream, and he quietly promises himself that he will protect their smiles no matter what happens. Before long, night falls over the forest. Smoke gently rises from the chimney, and the smell of dinner fills the warm cabin. The two adults sit together having their meal, while Dorothy has already quietly fallen asleep nearby. Suddenly, they hear a quiet, soft sound coming from her direction. Looking over, they see that Dorothy is fast asleep while still tightly clutching her spoon. The adorable sight makes both of them burst into quiet laughter. Juwon gently lifts the sleeping girl into his arms and carries her over to the bed. Lizzie watches them silently, a warm feeling filling her chest once again. After tucking Dorothy in gently, Juwon walks back to the kitchen area. Later that evening, Lizzie prepares some hot water and begins cleaning up the dishes and household items. She is so focused that she doesn't notice Juwon coming closer until he gently reaches out and stops her hand. Startled by his touch, she quickly turns around to face him. The cabin has become incredibly quiet, with only a dim, warm light illuminating the room. Juwon looks a bit embarrassed, and Lizzie quickly looks away, avoiding his eyes. Gathering her courage, she takes a clean cloth and gently wipes the sweat from his neck and hands. Every movement she makes is incredibly careful and soft. She tries to calm her beating heart, telling herself that this is just what a good partner is supposed to do. Juwon doesn't move, quietly letting her take care of him. A warm, gentle smile slowly spreads across his face. Looking up, Lizzie suddenly realizes just how close they are standing, and she instantly gets flustered all over again. Seeing how flustered she is, Juwon gently takes her hands in his to help her calm down. They lock eyes for a quiet moment before he softly suggests that it's time for them to get some rest. A moment later, the two of them head into the cozy little bedroom. Dorothy is already sleeping peacefully nearby, while a small lamp casts a warm, soft glow across the room. They lie down, facing each other in the quiet room. Juwon turns his gaze toward the sleeping little girl. Deep down, he wishes for just one thing: to have these two by his side for a very long time. Closing his eyes, he silently prays to Santa to protect their small happiness for the rest of his life. As the room grows quiet, old memories begin to drift back into Lizzie's mind. She thinks about how noble families live in massive estates with endless rooms, whereas ordinary families like theirs sleep huddled together in one tiny space. Living so close together, children often learn way too early how married couples spend their nights, and this memory drags her even deeper into her past. She remembers hiding under her blankets as a little girl, listening to her mother cry all the way until morning while her father's voice trembled with fear. Back then, she lived in constant fear, absolutely convinced that the exact same terrifying future was waiting for her. The gentle warmth of the morning sun slowly brings her back to reality. The quiet crackling of the fireplace fills the cozy room as Lizzie slowly opens her eyes. She feels confused at first, remembering clearly that she had fallen asleep on the hard, cold floor, but then she realizes what actually happened. Juwon has gently placed his arm under her head as a pillow, and her expression instantly softens at the realization. Looking at him, the old fears she used to have about marriage quietly begin to melt away. Rested against his broad chest, she can't help but think about how much her entire life has changed for the better since meeting him. A soft smile plays on her lips as she snuggles just a little closer to his comforting warmth. A little while later, Juwon wakes up too and looks down beside him. He finds both Lizzie and Dorothy using his arms as pillows. While Dorothy is fast asleep, Lizzie is completely frozen, realizing how incredibly close they are. Her heart is beating so fast and loud that she's terrified he might actually hear it. Juwon just gives her a gentle smile, enjoying the peacefulness of the morning. Quietly, he sits up and pulls the warm blanket up to cover Dorothy. He gently strokes the little blonde girl's hair, making her mumble something cute in her sleep. A bit later, Lizzie walks over to the fireplace to grab the heavy metal bucket. Before she can reach it, a large, strong hand reaches out and grabs the handle first. She takes a step back in surprise, and Juwon just smiles at her warm-heartedly. He carries the bucket outside to fill it with fresh water and comes back, speaking to her in his native language. Lizzie blinks, tilting her head as she tries to figure out what he is trying to say. When she finally realizes, her face completely flushes red, leaving Juwon looking quite confused. It looks like the sweet, affectionate way he just addressed her was way too much for her to handle. He thinks about it for a second and decides that maybe calling her by a cute nickname would be a better choice. Hearing this, Lizzie turns an even deeper shade of red. She quickly turns her back to hide her face, but her bright red ears completely betray her. Juwon holds back a chuckle, thinking her reactions are starting to get way too cute. He gently taps her back, trying to get her to look at him again. Right then, Dorothy wakes up and immediately starts thinking about food, imagining a giant, delicious piece of meat floating right in front of her. Her stomach growls loudly, and she quickly tumbles right out of bed onto the floor. She runs over and throws herself at them, happily calling out for her family, which startles both Juwon and Lizzie before making them smile. Of course, Dorothy doesn't care about their romantic moment at all. Her only focus is the food. The second she spots the meat, her eyes light up as if she's just discovered a chest of treasure. She crawls toward the wooden bucket with pure determination, making Juwon burst out laughing. Using every bit of energy in her tiny body, Dorothy happily demands her breakfast. Seeing how enthusiastic she is makes him promise himself that he will work even harder to hunt, ensuring his family never has to worry about going hungry. A short while later, Juwon heads deep into the forest with his axe in hand. He is different from before. He now has a proper weapon and a strong determination to protect and feed his new family. But as he walks deeper, a strange chill fills the air. He stops dead in his tracks, feeling that something is very wrong. The silence around him grows heavy and suffocating. Juwon slowly scans the dark shadows of the trees, preparing himself for whatever beast might show up. Suddenly, a figure slowly steps out from the darkness. It turns out to be an old man with his face hidden beneath a deep hood, prompting Juwon to tighten his grip on his axe. The mysterious stranger just stands there, quietly watching his every move. A short while before this, a very important event takes place in the quiet woods. The old hunter stands quietly in the forest, carefully inspecting the massive footprints left behind by a giant beast. He has been keeping a close watch on the cabin for several days, and he has already come to a very clear conclusion. The newcomer has absolutely no idea how to hold a weapon properly, which makes the whole situation seem completely ridiculous to the old hunter. A complete amateur should never have been able to defeat a monster like that, especially since even the most experienced hunters hesitate to face it. Something about this whole situation feels completely wrong, and his curiosity drives him to go investigate. Now, he is finally standing right in front of the answer he has been looking for. The old stranger's gaze suddenly locks onto Juwon's arm, focusing directly on the nasty bite marks. His expression changes instantly when he sees that the deep wound has already almost fully healed. An ordinary person would still be stuck in bed or dead from a terrible infection by now, yet this giant of a man is standing there perfectly fine. There's only one logical explanation left. Magic has to be involved. The old hunter knows just how incredibly rare magic users are in this world. People with those kinds of special abilities almost never show up in remote, small places like this. At the same time, Juwon stands there sweating nervously on the inside, wondering who this highly suspicious old man could be. All of a sudden, the old man's eyes flash with a faint purple glow. In this moment, only one thought fills the old man's head. After waiting for so long, his perfect opportunity for revenge has finally arrived. Juwon, who has absolutely no idea what is going on, just quietly stares back at him, trying to figure out if this old guy is dangerous. Years ago, long before he became the stubborn, grumpy hunter standing in front of Juwon, he was a young warrior filled with ambition. In those days, village guards would fight in wars, hoping to make a name for themselves and eventually serve under powerful nobles. He wanted to live his own life instead of just following in his father's footsteps, so he left home to travel through different villages, dreaming of becoming a famous hunter. Eventually, he settled down in a mountain village that had plenty of natural resources, taking on the job of their protector. While everything seemed calm, one weird detail always stood out. There was barely any firewood near the village, even though the locals were allowed to gather wood from the Lord's forest. Because of this unspoken rule, the villagers only gathered wood from the very edges of the forest, staying completely away from the deeper parts of the woods. The young guard never bothered to ask why, which was a massive mistake that almost cost him his life. One afternoon, he decided to go much deeper into the thick forest while trying to map out the surrounding land. He can still clearly recall the absolute terror that followed. Hurt and lying helplessly on the ground, he realized far too late that he had stepped right into a horrifying nightmare hidden deep in the mountains. A giant green monster stood right in front of him, bringing him face to face with a harsh and cruel reality. These beasts ruled the higher areas of the mountain, and even worse, they stole women from nearby towns to keep their bloodline going. Shaking with absolute terror, the young guard finally realized why young women kept vanishing from the nearby villages. The quiet, peaceful mountain village had actually been hiding a dark secret all along. It was known as the Village of Monsters. He managed to survive, but only by the skin of his teeth, and his survival left him with deep physical and mental scars. For many years, he lived right next to the very villagers he secretly hated deep down. That pure hatred slowly turned into an obsession, and that obsession eventually became his sole reason for living. One dark night, holding a lit torch up to the sky, he made a solemn promise to himself that he would one day destroy every single monster nest on this mountain. Breaking away from his memories, the old hunter turns his focus back to Juhuan, a tiny spark of hope shining inside his tired eyes. This giant newcomer has unbelievable strength, a massive body, and rapid healing powers that no normal human could ever possess. In the old man's mind, everything makes perfect sense. This strange outsider has the potential to become the most powerful monster hunter these mountains have ever seen. He also knows that they are running out of time because those beasts will eventually return, and once they have no more women left to kidnap, they will turn the entire village into their hunting ground. Before things reach that point, he decides he will train and mold Juhuan into the perfect weapon to wipe those creatures out once and for all. Hiding a sneaky smile under his hood, the old-timer figures that making a solid deal will keep the beginner from quitting halfway through his training, so he finally opens his mouth to speak. Juhuan doesn't understand a single thing the man is saying, but he still gives a polite bow while keeping his balance and staying a safe distance away. The veteran hunter notices right away that even though the kid is totally confused, he still hasn't let his guard down for a second, which makes the old man smile. From that very moment, he makes up his mind that this giant idiot is going to be his new student. The next morning comes all too quickly, and Juhuan stretches out his sore muscles, feeling like he has barely gotten any sleep before the bright morning sun starts shining into the cabin. Outside, the old hunter is already waiting patiently by the edge of the yard. He purposefully avoids going inside, because he doesn't want any random strangers getting too comfortable walking into the house where Lizzie and Dorothy live alone. Looking out through the cracks in the wooden door, Juhuan spots the old man right away. Then he notices the old man's smile, which looks incredibly shady and suspicious. For a quick second, it reminds him of those stressful meetings back on Earth when managers were about to deliver some really bad news. Not wanting to waste any time, Juhuan quietly picks up his backpack and tries to act like he hasn't seen the old man standing there. But just as he is about to move, Lizzie calls out his name, making him turn around. Her face is completely flushed red as she holds some food she has cooked for him, nervously packing it all up while trying her best not to look him in the eyes. Seeing her act so shy and sweet immediately makes Juhuan's face turn red as well. Meanwhile, little Dorothy is watching the two of them with giant, sparkling eyes. Out of nowhere, the little girl bolts across the room, her tiny feet pattering against the wooden floor until she stops right in front of him with her arms wide open, making Juhuan freeze in place. Standing right behind her, Lizzie looks just as nervous and flustered. A moment later, she steps up to help adjust his backpack, quietly telling him to make sure he eats well while he is out on his trip. A smile creeps onto Juhuan's face before he even realizes it, since having people actually care about him and worry about his safety still feels so strange. They speak softly to each other before he leaves, and even though he can't understand every single word they say, he gets the general idea. He can tell she is telling him to come back safely, so wanting to practice the local language, Juhuan points toward Lizzie and tries his best to repeat the phrase back to her. Both the mother and her daughter look quite surprised by his effort. Lizzie quickly breaks into a warm smile and nods in approval after hearing him pronounce the words. Dorothy jumps in right away, repeating the exact same words and playfully telling him to make sure he comes back in one piece. Juhuan's heart absolutely melts right then and there, so he gives them a big wave, smiling as he promises them that he will come back home. The mother and daughter keep waving to him from the doorway, watching their new protector walk away. As soon as Juhuan turns around to leave, the warm look on his face completely vanishes. Deep down, he really doesn't want to leave his comfortable new home, but he knows that survival has to be his top priority right now. His legs grow incredibly heavy as the exhausting hike drains his energy, making him wonder what on earth is so important that the old man wants to show him. Out of nowhere, the old hunter suddenly comes to a complete stop. Juhuan has to react quickly to avoid bumping right into his back. The old veteran taps his foot repeatedly against the dirt ground beneath them. Feeling confused, Juhuan looks down at the ground and immediately notices something very unusual. The footprints the old man leaves behind are not normal at all, with each step set at a weird angle and distance, almost like the hunter is placing them that way on purpose. A crazy idea pops into Juwan's head, and without hesitation, he decides to go through with it. The giant rookie stands up straight and begins carefully copying every single step the veteran hunter takes. The old hunter glances back, sees what his student is doing, and simply smirks without saying a word. As they walk deeper into the forest, the old hunter decides to teach through actions instead of words. He stops to touch a tree, explaining how every mountain has its own unique animals and natural resources. Occasionally, he uses a stick to draw rough maps in the dirt, pointing out hills, rivers, and the best hunting paths. Juhuan watches closely, memorizing every detail even if he doesn't understand all of it. Eventually, they stop to rest deep in the mountains, and Juhuan sits down on a large rock to catch his breath. The veteran hunter watches him quietly for a moment before reaching into his leather bag. Curious about what the old man is doing, Ju-hwan leans forward, wondering what lesson he is about to learn. But instead of a tool, the old man just pulls out a small wooden object. He then gestures to Ju-hwan, signaling that it is finally time for lunch. Ju-hwan's face instantly lights up. As he opens his lunchbox, he happily remembers how excited Dorothy was and how carefully Lizzie had prepared the meal for him. Just looking at the food puts a big smile on his face, and for a second, he feels like the happiest man in the world. But before he can take a bite, the old hunter suddenly raises his hand, causing Ju-hwan to freeze in place. The veteran urgently signals for Ju-hwan to close his lunchbox right away. Confused and worried, Ju-hwan wonders what kind of mistake he has made this time. Using hand gestures and a few simple words, the veteran explains that cooked food releases a strong smell that can easily attract dangerous beasts from miles away. Hearing this, all the excitement instantly drains out of Ju-hwan. The delicious meal he was so looking forward to has suddenly turned into dangerous monster bait. After putting the food away, they continue their hike until they reach another small cabin hidden deep within the forest. The old hunter points toward the cabin and proudly tells him that this is where his real training will begin. When Ju-hwan is handed a bow, he notices how strange it looks. It is completely straight and unfamiliar, nothing like the curved bows he is used to seeing. Ignoring Ju-hwan's confused look, the veteran steps forward and raises the bow. Slowly and smoothly, he pulls back the heavy string while aiming up at the sky. He lets go, and the arrow flies through the air, burying itself deep into a tree trunk far away. Ju-hwan watches in awe, finally understanding what he needs to do. He quickly copies the veteran's stance, raises his own bow, and gets ready to fire. The old hunter walks over to adjust Ju-hwan's arms and correct his posture. However, as soon as he touches Ju-hwan's arms, he notices how incredibly steady and strong they are. Ju-hwan doesn't shake at all, and the veteran's expression completely changes in surprise. Blocking out everything else, Ju-hwan focuses his entire mind on the target in front of him. He makes sure that every single movement is a chance to practice, treating every piece of advice as a crucial lesson. Deep down, a strong determination begins to grow inside him. Ju-hwan wants to become strong so that he can handle any problem on his own. More than anything, he needs the strength to protect both Lizzie and little Dorothy. While Ju-hwan is busy training out in the forest, a quiet peace still lingers around the cozy cabin. Inside, Dorothy is happily lying on her bed, humming a sweet song about the beautiful blue sky, Lizzie's pretty hair, Ju-hwan's dark hair, and the tasty meat he brings home for them. The little girl feels so happy and full that she genuinely believes the delicious meat is still sitting in her tiny stomach, keeping her satisfied until the next meal. Glancing toward the corner of the room, she sees Lizzie smiling and realizes something very important. Ever since Ju-hwan showed up, her mother has been laughing so much more and doesn't look sad or lonely anymore. Every time Dorothy sees her mother this happy, a warm, cozy feeling fills her little chest. But that sudden happiness quickly brings back her deepest fears. She remembers that neither Ju-hwan nor Lizzie are her actual parents, and that sad thought causes her smile to fade away. Looking up at the stars outside the window, she begins to worry that one day Ju-hwan might leave with Lizzie, leaving an unwanted, useless child like her all alone. Tears start to fill her bright golden eyes as painful memories of her past begin to resurface. Before she can get completely lost in her sad thoughts, a strange flickering light coming from outside catches her eye. Looking around, she notices that she is all alone in the room, making her wonder where Lizzie could have gone in the middle of the night. Suddenly, the harsh, cruel voice of her real father echoes in her head. She remembers him calling her useless just because she wasn't born a boy, constantly yelling that she did nothing but waste their food. Trembling from the painful memories, Dorothy runs straight to their meat bucket first, feeling a desperate need to make sure the food is safe. She breathes a sigh of relief when she sees that the food is still there, but she immediately goes back to searching for Lizzie. Suddenly, an angry voice shouts from outside, causing her to freeze in terror. Hiding behind the doorframe, she carefully peeks through a small crack and instantly recognizes the scary men standing out in the yard. Out in the cold night, 3 intimidating debt collectors have cornered Lizzie in front of the house. They meanly accuse her of stealing the meat, ignoring her desperate explanations that Ju-hwan hunted it himself. The blonde leader just laughs in her face, while another man claims her husband is already dead and calls her a lying thief. When Lizzie tries to block them, the men roughly shove her out of the way and force their way inside the cabin. But the moment they cross the threshold, they stop dead in their tracks. Their eyes land on the massive wolf pelt hanging on the wall, and pure greed fills their faces. The leader slowly runs his hand over the soft fur, realizing it's worth a fortune, while the other 2 men start tearing the cabin apart to search for more treasures. Cowering under a piece of furniture, Dorothy listens to their heavy footsteps coming closer and finally realizes what they are after. They don't just want to take their food, they want to rob them of absolutely everything they own. Terrified, Lizzie runs back inside the cabin and throws herself in front of the valuable wolf pelt to protect it from being stolen. With tears streaming down her face, she begs them to leave it alone, crying out that the pelt belongs to her family. Before she can even react, the blonde man suddenly slaps her hard across the face. The force of the blow knocks her onto the wooden floor as a sharp pain spreads through her body. She quickly turns her head to look. Dorothy is standing hidden nearby, watching with a terrified look on her face. Fear immediately washes over Lizzie, making her forget the pain. Even though she is shaking all over, she tries to crawl toward her daughter. Dorothy can only watch in absolute shock as tears slowly fill her eyes. The little girl blames herself, thinking that she did something wrong to cause all of this. The men just laugh. One of them warns the others that getting caught will be troublesome since experienced hunters are rare in their village. The blonde leader completely ignores the warning and grabs Lizzie roughly by the arm. He suggests dragging her deeper into the forest where no one will be able to hear her screams. Before dragging her away, the leader threatens her, warning that if she says a single word to Juwan when he gets back, they will burn the cabin down. With that, they start to drag her off. Little Dorothy is left all alone. Hidden inside the dark room, the poor girl trembles with absolute fear. The person she loves most in the world has just been taken right before her eyes. Crying desperately, she runs out of the house and screams Juwan's name over and over, begging him to come back quickly. Deep in the forest, Juwan is still walking alongside the old hunter, listening carefully to another one of his lessons. The veteran hunter suddenly points back toward the path they came from, as if trying to show him something. But Juwan doesn't notice anything wrong, simply bowing politely and thanking him for the training. But then, Dorothy's desperate voice suddenly echoes through the quiet forest. Juwan stops dead in his tracks because he knows that isn't a normal cry. Pure panic washes over him as he realizes Dorothy would never cry like that unless something terrible had happened. He starts running as fast as he can, every terrifying possibility racing through his mind as he dashes back home. When he arrives, what he sees makes his blood boil. 3 men are holding Lizzie down. In that instant, something snaps inside of him. One of the thugs turns around when he hears heavy footsteps rushing toward them. Before the man can even blink, Juwan's fist slams directly into his face, sending him flying across the ground. He immediately stands between Lizzie and the intruders, while she looks up at him with tears of pure relief in her eyes. But Juwan doesn't look back at her. He just walks straight toward the remaining men, his face twisted with pure rage. The second thug starts sweating nervously the moment Juwan takes a step forward. Juwan delivers a brutal knee strike right into his stomach, dropping him to the ground instantly. The blonde leader tries to throw a desperate punch, but Juwan easily dodges it and grabs him. Juwan lifts him completely off the ground and slams him hard against the dirt. Juwan pins him down, his anger boiling over. He truly believes that anyone who dares to touch his family deserves to be crushed. A dangerous blue energy begins to gather around his fist. Lizzie freezes in shock, and the blonde thug trembles in pure terror as Juwan tightly grabs his collar. Just as he is about to strike, Lizzie screams his name, causing Juwan to pause for a brief second. Right then, one of the other thugs tries to ambush him from behind with a sharp weapon. Without even looking, Juwan catches the man's arm effortlessly and squeezes it tight, causing fear to spread across the attacker's face. The sheer strength crushing his arm feels absolutely monstrous. Lizzie desperately begs Juwan to stop, and right at that moment, the old hunter finally catches up and arrives at the scene. The old man grabs Juwan's arm and points toward the cabin window, where little Dorothy is standing and crying. The moment Juwan sees her crying, all of his murderous rage suddenly fades away. Juwan has always been so gentle and kind, but today Lizzie saw a completely different side of him, someone who can become absolutely terrifying to protect the people he loves. For a brief second, she is reminded of her former husband and worries that history is about to repeat itself. But that fear quickly vanishes the moment she looks into Juwan's eyes. There is absolutely no cruelty in his gaze. There is only desperation and a deep desire to protect them. However, Juwan completely misunderstands the look on her face. Seeing the shock on her face makes him think she is now terrified of him. The deep sadness that appears on his face hurts Lizzie far more than the entire fight did. The language barrier stands between them once again, preventing her from telling him what she truly feels. So instead of speaking, she decides to show him. Calling out his name with all her strength, Lizzie reaches out and firmly grabs his hands. As her palms touch his warm, rough hands, a feeling of complete certainty fills her heart. This man is not someone she needs to fear. He is her safe haven. Pressing his hands gently against her face, Lizzie silently thanks the man who has finally brought warmth and safety into their lives. Juwan pulls her into a warm hug, wondering why she is feeling so incredibly grateful to him. In his heart, he believes that he is the one who should be saying thank you to her. Just then, Lizzie's eyes catch sight of little Dorothy sobbing inside the safety of the house. She points toward the window with a worried look and runs back to the house as fast as she can. Hurrying inside, Lizzie gently asks the little girl if she is doing all right. Dorothy is still shaking all over, tears streaming down her pale face. Even though she was the one who ran to get Juwan's help in the first place, actually seeing his giant fists swing so violently was absolutely terrifying to her. She can't stop picturing the badly bruised and swollen faces of her stepmother and Lizzie in her mind. The terrifying thought that her own face could look like that one day makes her shudder with deep fear. She desperately wants to apologize to Lizzie and tell her how sorry she is, terrified that Lizzie might start ignoring her and treating her like a ghost, just like her cruel stepfather used to do. Dorothy quickly says she is sorry for hiding under the bed instead of doing something to help. Sobbing uncontrollably, the poor girl says that everything is entirely her fault. Lizzie hugs her tightly, telling her not to say such heartbreaking things. Lizzie explains that when they made eye contact earlier, she only pretended not to see her because she wanted to make sure those scary men wouldn't discover her hiding spot. She assures the little girl that she has absolutely nothing to feel guilty or bad about. Lizzie then says that thanks to her papa, they are all safe now, which confuses Dorothy, who reminds her that her actual father passed away a long time ago. Smiling warmly, Lizzie asks if she doesn't know who Ju-hwan is to them, but Dorothy simply replies that Ju-hwan is just Ju-hwan, then asks if he is Lizzie's husband. Lizzie beams and tells her she is exactly right, explaining that since Ju-hwan is her husband, that makes him Dorothy's new papa too, leaving the little girl completely stunned and confused. Lizzie patiently breaks it down for her, explaining that since she is Dorothy's new mother and Dorothy is her beloved daughter, Ju-hwan naturally becomes her papa too. Dorothy is completely amazed that she never put these simple pieces together until now. She peers through the glass window at Ju-hwan, turning back to ask Lizzie one more time if that giant man is truly her new papa. Lizzie gently nods and reassures her, promising Dorothy that Ju-hwan is nothing like the terrible father she used to have. He is not a man who hurts or beats his family, but rather someone who will always protect and keep them safe from harm. And that is exactly why Ju-hwan fought those bad men so fiercely out there in the yard. Hearing this, Dorothy looks back out the window and shouts out to Ju-hwan with all her might, calling him her papa. She can hardly believe that this massive giant of a man, with his huge face, towering body, and giant hands and feet, is actually her very own dad. She dashes out of the house, overjoyed by the realization that she has a super strong and wonderful papa who protects both her and Lizzie. She remembers that he has never once raised a hand against her and always cuddles her close to keep her warm and safe when they sleep at night. He always smiles kindly at her, feeds her delicious meat, and even gave her her very own name with a warm and happy look on his face. It feels absolutely wonderful to realize that the kind man who gave her an identity is her real father now. Ju-hwan turns around at the sound of her voice and happily sweeps the little girl up into his arms with a big smile. Even though he can't quite make sense of the words she is yelling, he can still understand the pure emotion behind what she is trying to tell him. As he stands up while holding her close, he catches a strange scent and realizes the poor little girl has accidentally wet herself from the fright. She looks so sweet and innocent that Ju-hwan feels a bit guilty for even pointing it out in his own mind. At that moment, Lizzie walks out of the house to join them, and the three of them share a beautiful, tight hug as a real, loving family. Suddenly, Dorothy remembers something important and wriggles out of Ju-hwan's strong arms. She runs over to where the defeated men are lying on the ground and starts looking around for something in the dirt. She spots the heavy basket of meat and tries to pick it up, but her tiny arms are way too weak to lift it. She pulls and grunts with everything she has, her little face turning bright red from all the hard work. Amused by her determination, Lizzie and Ju-hwan walk over to give the little girl a hand. Even as she struggles, Ju-hwan can't help but admire just how incredibly stubborn and determined she is. He and Lizzie both share a silent laugh, agreeing that her deep love for meat is truly on another level. Ju-hwan steps forward and effortlessly picks up the heavy basket with just one hand. Looking down at her cute, chubby face, he chuckles to himself, thinking how surprisingly easy it is to become a child's absolute hero over nothing more than a basket of food. Lizzie smiles and waves her hand, signaling for Ju-hwan to bring everything inside the house. Now that their family is safe and sound, they all get ready to finally go back indoors. Before he does, Ju-hwan walks back over to the beaten men, his face turning cold and serious. He looks ready to end their lives right then and there, but the old man steps in and signals for him to calm down, which Ju-hwan thankfully understands. It would cause massive trouble if the authorities came and arrested him for murder, especially now that he has a family to care for instead of just himself. He memorizes their faces carefully, telling himself that if these thugs ever dare to show up near his home again, they will face a fate far worse than death. The old man points to the supplies and gear the men dropped, gesturing that these items will be incredibly useful for surviving up in the mountains. Ju-hwan looks back at his cozy home, watching Lizzie playing happily with little Dorothy. He gathers the left-behind supplies along with the wolfskin, carries them inside, and neatly stores them away. He reminds himself that losing his loved ones once in his life was already more than enough pain to bear. With a quiet, determined smile, he vows to protect Lizzie and Dorothy from any danger until his very last breath. He flashes a bright, warm smile and waves at Dorothy and Lizzie, who happily wave back at him. Inside their cozy cabin, Lizzie tries to dress a playful, pantless Dorothy, who is too busy having fun. Watching his new family, Ju-hwan is distracted by movement outside as the village chief arrives. Looking over the unconscious thugs lying on the ground, the chief makes it clear he did not come to start another fight, but rather to settle the mess quietly. He assures Ju-hwan that he will personally reprimand the troublemakers and suggests they end the conflict right here. To smooth things over, the chief offers a roll of fabric as compensation, hoping it will buy Juhwan's silence. Juhwan is incredibly irritated by such a cheap payoff, but he knows he has absolutely no leverage to negotiate. Realizing he cannot risk making enemies of the entire village, especially since he cannot speak their tongue yet, he begrudgingly accepts the deal, vowing to master the local language immediately. It is frustrating not to demand real justice, but Juhwan must swallow his pride for the safety of his family. His stress melts away when Lizzie calls out to him, and little Dorothy charges forward to wrap him in a giant hug. Juhwan playfully teases his daughter about running around half-naked in the cold, completely forgetting his anger as her laughter fills the room. Lizzie spots Dorothy running around and tries to corner her, but the sneaky kid uses Juhwan as a human shield, dodging her mother by circling his giant legs while giggling. Once the house finally quiets down and Dorothy falls asleep, Lizzie rolls up the new fabric, relieved that their daughter is still happy and laughing despite the terrifying events from earlier. Watching her, Juhwan reflects on the attack and decides he must master magic. With magical powers, protecting his family would be easy, and he could make a fortune as a top-tier hunter. Squeezing his fists, he tries to force his energy to activate, but gets nothing, leaving him clueless on how to trigger his powers. Lizzie notices his strained grunting and checks his forehead for a fever, but Juhwan's focus shifts when he spots a fresh bruise on her cheek. Fury rises inside him, outraged that those thugs dared to touch Lizzie. Looking at her fragile frame, he wishes he could use magic to heal her instantly. Reassuring him with a warm smile, Lizzie places her hands on his cheeks, playfully squishing them to break his serious expression. Suddenly, Juhwan sweeps Lizzie into a gentle bridal carry to get her off the cold floor. Holding her close, his eyes widen in pure shock. The dark bruise on her cheek has completely vanished. Staring at her flawless skin, he wonders if his clumsy magic training actually worked. A joyful smile spreads across his face as he realizes he has unlocked the ability to use healing magic. While Juhwan celebrates his breakthrough, a different scheme unfolds in the village. An older woman furiously kicks a chicken, scolding it for not recognizing its owner. The village chief sighs and asks if she is still holding a grudge over the fabric he gave to the forest keeper. He patiently explains that the village cannot survive without a keeper to protect the workers and the harvest. The woman angrily retorts that he had no right to give away a precious roll of fabric she saved for 10 years. The chief, sympathetic but firm, explains that Juhwan is a powerful man experienced in combat, and they cannot afford to lose workers. He recalls the healed bite mark on Juhwan's arm and realizes the rumors are true. The giant is a rare healing mage. A healing mage is incredibly valuable, and wealthy nobles would pay a fortune to acquire one. Greed fills the chief as he imagines selling Juhwan to the royal family to secure a life of luxury. Fortunately, no one else is clever enough to realize Juhwan's true value. But the chief must remain extremely cautious to prevent powerful guilds from seizing him by force. To manage the situation, the chief plans to have old Gus keep Juhwan occupied with training while he searches for a wealthy buyer. He instructs the older woman to befriend Lizzie, warning her that Juhwan is highly intelligent and observant. If they make him an enemy, he might discover they are secretly stealing the local lord's property. The woman grumpily relents and agrees to cooperate. To prevent the clever forest keeper from suspecting anything, the chief decides to return some items they previously stole from his cabin. Tossing wood into the furnace, the chief sighs at returning the loot, but grins, knowing he must give up a little to win big in the end. This gesture works perfectly. Inside their cabin, Juhwan adjusts his dark hunter's uniform as Lizzie happily unpacks a massive delivery of household goods and fresh ingredients sent by the chief. Looking at how delighted she is hugging the bottles of milk, Juhwan chuckles. He marvels at how she can be so happy over simple groceries, noting she wasn't even this thrilled when her bruise vanished. He watches her with a tender smile, realizing true happiness is found in these simple things. Preparing to leave, Juhwan tries out the local language he has been practicing, awkwardly telling her he is heading out. Lizzie giggles and gently corrects his pronunciation. Repeating the phrase correctly, Juhwan waves with a happy grin and heads out the door. Outside, Juhwan prepares for his rabbit hunting trip with old Gus, checking their pile of firewood. Thinking of little Dorothy, who constantly sings about wanting meat, he tells himself he must succeed today. Clutching his hunting axe, Juhwan swallows nervously and doubts his skills, but commands himself to harden his heart and discard his modern sensibilities. Despite his resolve, his mind wanders to a cute, fluffy rabbit, which hilariously turns into an image of Lizzie wearing bunny ears. Blushing furiously, he covers his face, hoping that any rabbit they find is ugly so he won't feel guilty about hunting it. Right on cue, a menacing creature with glowing red eyes and a horn on its head glares at him from the shadows, looking nothing like a harmless rabbit. After quickly finishing his daily chores, Juhwan finds himself with some extra time. He decides to practice his magic. While healing minor injuries is now easy for him, using offensive elemental magic is still a real challenge. He wonders why his fire spell worked so well during his first fight with the giant wolf, questioning if his magic only activates in life or death situations. Hoping to use that power again, Juhwan focuses his energy and confidently calls out for a firestorm. But nothing happens. Since he isn't expecting a miracle, he shrugs it off. Still, he wishes he could do it to make little Dorothy happy, as his quiet healing magic isn't as exciting as flashy fire spells. He wishes he could show off a cool magic trick, hoping to have just a bit of fire to show her. Just as he is about to give up, sparks appear at his fingertips and he successfully summons a small flame, about the size of a lighter. At that moment, little Dorothy steps out of the cabin, still sleepy, but her sleepiness vanishes when she sees what Juhwan is doing, and she excitedly shouts that her new dad is making fire with his bare hand. Juhwan warns her to stay back, but she is too excited and wants to run and tell her mother. She stares at him as if he were a superhero. Hearing the shouting, Lizzie rushes outside and freezes in shock when she sees the fire. Seeing them both look at him with admiration makes Juhwan want to grow the flame, even though controlling it is very draining. Still, having both healing and fire magic feels like a big win. Suddenly, Lizzie gasps as if she remembers something important and rushes back inside with Dorothy following her. Juhwan is confused why his audience has just left his magic show. On top of that, he realizes a major problem with his new spell. He doesn't know how to turn it off. Just as he accepts that he might have a permanently burning hand, the flame vanishes on its own, leaving him even more confused. He goes back inside, thinking that magic in this world is strange and hard to control. Inside, he finds Dorothy staring sadly at their food supply, upset by how little meat is left. Lizzie chuckles at her daughter's dramatic reaction, but it is clear she is truly bummed. Seeing her sad face motivates Juhwan to hunt some massive rabbits and bring home a big feast for his family. Then, old Gus calls out to him, signaling it is time to go. Juhwan grabs his gear and says his goodbyes as Dorothy wishes him a safe trip. He praises her for being a good girl before turning to Lizzie and telling her to stay safe. He leans in and kisses Lizzie, and not wanting to be left out, little Dorothy asks for a goodbye kiss too. Juhwan happily kneels down and gives her a gentle kiss on the cheek, which makes her happy. But as he gets close, he playfully accuses her of sneaking some of their precious meat, which she proudly admits to. After saying his final goodbyes, Juhwan and Gus head deep into the mountains. The old veteran immediately turns the hike into a survival lesson, constantly asking Juhwan about which trees make the best firewood. He makes him analyze fresh rabbit droppings to learn how to track prey. Suddenly, Gus signals for him to stop, pointing to one of their traps. Juhwan expects to see a cute bunny but is horrified to find a giant muscular beast hanging from the rope. He quickly realizes that the rabbits in this world are anything but normal, looking like they are mixed with kangaroos. Gus notes that the angry monster is still full of energy, making it the perfect first target for Juhwan's training. However, the veteran hunter warns him that this won't be easy because facing an aggressive beast that can fight back is completely different from hunting defenseless animals. Gus admits that even after all these years, he still remembers the adrenaline rush of his first kill. He tells Juhwan to step up and draw the bow and arrow he has prepared for him. Fortunately, Juhwan has already learned enough of the local language to understand the old man's instructions. Gus tells him the first kill is his, but he has a tough lesson in mind. He wants to show Juhwan how brutal hunting really is. He orders Juhwan to step closer and shoot the struggling beast in the foot first, which surprises Juhwan. But there is a reason for the old man's strange request. He wants Juhwan to practice hitting a live, moving target, forcing him to get used to shooting an animal in pain. In Gus's eyes, the mountain is a neutral place that doesn't favor anyone. He believes that if hunters aren't ruthless, the wild beasts will eventually win. Warning Juhwan that his survival depends on this cold mindset, Gus demands he shoot. But Juhwan's modern morals make him hesitate. He knows shooting the creature's foot will only cause it senseless pain. He is under immense pressure, unable to understand why the old man is forcing him to be so cruel. Gus yells at him to hurry up and shoot the foot first, then the head. As he aims, Juhwan is hit with dark flashbacks of his first horrible days in this world. He remembers waking up in a starved body, locked in a cage filled with rotting corpses. A true hell. As the giant rabbit thrashes and growls, Juhwan admits to himself that he knows nothing about hunting or surviving in these dangerous mountains. He has no idea how he will make it in this brutal new world. But looking at Gus, he realizes one thing. The old man is genuinely trying to train him to survive as a true hunter. With new determination, Juhwan pushes aside his hesitation and lets the arrow fly straight toward his prey. After his arrow pierces the wild rabbit's leg, Juhwan realizes he has actually hit his target. But instead of letting him celebrate, Gus immediately tells him to shoot the poor animal again, which shocks Juhwan. Gus orders him to aim right for the rabbit's front paws this time, and even though Juhwan doesn't understand why, he trusts that his mentor has a good reason. He starts to feel sorry for the creature, but he quickly pushes those feelings away by thinking of Lizzie and Dorothy. He forces himself to ignore the rabbit's painful cries and treat them as normal animal sounds, deciding he will become a monster or a killer if it means keeping those two girls safe and fed. Once the hunt is over, Juhwan cannot help but think about what he has just done, feeling guilty for hurting the rabbit on purpose when he could have ended its life quickly. It feels cruel to him, like he is breaking the natural rules of the forest. However, he reminds himself that hunting isn't supposed to be nice. It is just a hard battle for survival, though he promises himself he will never forget the cruelty of this day. A moment later, Gus tells Juwan to gather up the rabbits they have caught and start heading back, and Juwan thanks him for all his help. But Gus stops him, pointing out that there is still one more rabbit left to catch before they can go. Looking closely at the rabbits already in his bag, Juwan notices a very strange one among them, and Gus quickly urges him to catch this final, unusual creature. But as he prepares to do so, a completely different idea comes to Juwan's mind. Instead of killing it, he thinks about keeping it alive, realizing that rabbits multiply fast and are easy to feed, which can give them a steady food supply in the future if times get tough. Inspired by this smart plan, Juwan decides he will capture the rabbit alive rather than ending its life. When he shares this idea, Gus smiles and agrees it is actually a very smart choice. With that, Juwan shifts his focus to catching the rabbits without harming them. By the time the sun begins to set, the two of them finally make their way back to a small cabin. Looking around the cozy home, Juwan thinks about his past life in the modern world, where he never expected to have a family and had no real goals to chase. This new life feels strange to him, but he is starting to realize how much things have changed now that he actually has the family he always wanted. For the first time, he feels like he has a true purpose and a reason to work hard every single day. As he is thinking about this, some wooden signs near the house catch his eye. One sign hanging on a large iron pot catches his attention because the carved symbols look just like the local writing system. Curious, he picks up one of the signs and shows it to Gus, making it clear he wants to learn the language, and Gus immediately understands and asks if he is truly ready to learn. Gus then hands him a few more wooden signs and tells him to bring them along as they walk together. From that moment on, Juwan dedicates himself to practicing his writing. Watching Juwan study so hard, Gus finds him to be a very unusual man, wondering why a person like him cares so much about learning how to read and write. It makes Gus think of his own past, remembering how he bought those same learning tools years ago, hoping that joining the military might help him work for a noble one day. It took Gus years to learn to read, and looking back, he feels like all that hard work has been mostly for nothing. He quickly shakes his head, forcing himself to stop thinking about his past failures and focus on the present. Instead, Gus turns his thoughts to a much bigger problem, knowing it is finally time to search deeper in the mountains for any signs of goblins. He knows there has to be a goblin village hidden somewhere in those wild peaks, and he prepares himself to venture into the dangerous territory. Since monsters always become more active in the warm spring months, goblin attacks are bound to increase, making the task even more urgent. Even though Juwan is still a beginner, Gus is amazed by how quickly the young man is learning, knowing he can soon hold his own in a real fight, while a sharp pain in Gus's injured leg reminds him that his chance for revenge against the goblins is coming very soon. Over at Juwan's house, a sweet scene is unfolding as little Dorothy excitedly asks Lizzie if she will get something special too, and Lizzie happily smiles and says yes. Lizzie jokes that Dorothy has already asked that same question 100 times, though the little girl has completely lost track of how many times she has asked. Just then, the door opens and Juwan finally walks into the house, sending Dorothy running straight into his arms for a big hug. When Juwan sets his heavy hunting bag down on the wooden floor, Dorothy notices something wiggling and shaking inside it. Her eyes go wide with wonder, and she asks if he has brought home some kind of magic. Juwan laughs softly, telling her it isn't magic, and kneels down to show them what he has brought. As he carefully opens the bag, a small rabbit suddenly pops its head out and hops onto the floor. Dorothy stares in absolute shock, because this is no normal rabbit. It has a sharp, tiny horn growing right out of its forehead.